probably 10 years. We've been going to the same retreats for a long time, and I've heard him speak at different workshops or different occasions, and really respect him. And Kevin, take it away, man. Thanks for joining us, and take it away.
Thanks, Sam. And thanks everyone for being here tonight. My name is Kevin O'Neill, and I'm an alcoholic. Due to the grace of God that I discovered in the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous, sponsorship and these 12 steps, I've not found it necessary to pick up a drink today or since January 22nd, 2004. And I'm grateful for that. And you'll have to forgive me. I'm just coming off of my weekly home group and kind of changing gears on the secretary of that meeting. So going from being in control to trying to give up some of the control, which is fundamental to this conversation, it's like flipping a switch. So, but I've learned to say yes today, and any Alcoholics Anonymous request or the request of someone from AA, that's something I'm going to say yes to. So, Sam, it's great to be with you. I'll just start by saying, listen, I'm not an expert on alcoholism, Alcoholics Anonymous, recovery, and I'm certainly not an expert on emotional sobriety. But one day at a time, little by slow, as they say, by concentrating on the next right stitch and kind of leaving the pattern up to a God I found here, I can tell you that my insides and my outsides have started to match up. And that's a change for me. I love this letter. This letter was given to me when I was probably a month sober, and it struck me then, and it strikes me every time I read it, and as I've kind of meditated upon it, particularly of late. It's overwhelming in its simplicity, right? See, I picked up my first drink at the age of 14, but I felt like I needed one well before that. And, I was a kid that was kind of walking around wanting to be loved, comforted, and understood. I was that guy that had the plug coming out of my chest, and I was going, trying to plug it into sources of energy that I didn't feel like I had within myself. I needed approval. I needed approbation. I needed respect. I needed affection. I needed, applause, or at least I would tell you that I needed that. That's what it felt. That's what life felt like for me. It felt like I needed that, and I was being starved. It was as if somebody was kind of stepping on my oxygen line, and I was just getting a little bit, but it wasn't enough to sustain me. And, the miraculous thing happened for me in a really dark time. And, I found that miraculous things frequently happen in really dark times. And it may not be the miraculous thing that you would immediately think of. It wasn't my recovery, right? The miraculous thing that happened to me was I found alcohol. At the age of 14, this kid whose insides and outsides did not match. I mean, I walked around desperately afraid, in fear that you would find out what was going on inside me. And there were things that I thought or behaviors I had that I would have covered up, and I would have taken to the electric chair rather than have what I was thinking or what I was doing. The guilt and shame that I felt. I mean, just so. My first, kind of that year, age of 14 was really an interesting time. And I'll kind of tell a story that, my parents, I'm the fifth of six kids in this, kind of big Irish Catholic family, loud and proud and rebellious and boisterous. And I was a kid that would sit at the dinner table and I'd hear these stories that my father, the World War II combat veteran, member of that greatest generation, the stories that he would tell, the stories that my older brothers would tell of their kind of daring do, their bravado, their kind of the fights and the drinking stories and all of those really, kind of, uh, the John Wayne sort of stories. I'd sit there as this big little kid. I was big for my age, but inside I was really small and desperately afraid. And I sat there in awe and petrified that I was going to actually have to do this stuff. I was going to have to, you know, have those fights or defend the honor of whoever or whomever. Like but I'd sit there in at the dinner table and I'd hear these stories and I would be scared to death. So at the age of 14, that miraculous thing happened. My dad sat my younger brother David and I down. It was the night before my freshman year in high school. And he said, "I'm leaving your mother tomorrow. Things haven't been going well, as you know. We've decided to split up. Kevin, you're the man of the house. No tears. You need to keep it together because your mother's going to need you." I have no idea what he said to David, my younger brother, but that was just the way I was. I mean, I'm sure he said the same thing to him, but to me, the spotlight was on me. And how I responded in that moment, it only became clear to me as I got sober and I actually started to look, introspectively at how I process things. My first response was, I was thinking, what does my dad respond to? He responds to power, right? So I said, "No, you're not." 14-year-old kid, I'm the testosterone is flowing and the adolescence is blooming. "No, you're not. I'm not going to let you leave. You're not going anywhere." Right? My father was a big guy and I was just a kid. And as soon as I realized that wasn't going to work, I crumbled to the floor. I held on to his ankles and I sobbed uncontrollably. And I said, "Dad, please don't leave. I'll be good." At the time, I would have thought that was kind of, a normal response, right? But as I've kind of looked at my life and I've gone through this process, what strikes me is just the incredible amount of ego that exists. I used to think ego is thinking, that I was wonderful and that, I was great and whatever. Ego is just me thinking about me, right? That I thought as a 14-year-old kid, I mean, I hadn't even started my dishwashing job yet, that I was going to control my 50-something-year-old father and change the trajectory of his plans. Oh, and by the way, that the reason he's leaving is that Kevin, his 14-year-old son, hasn't been good. So just the ego that shot through that whole sentiment and that response, those are my coping mechanisms. That's Kevin without a drink. And that year, which was a painful, devastating year for my mother and for my younger brother and I, my mother would cry herself to sleep every night. She was devastated. 25 years married, and her life as she knew it at that point in time was over. But what that did for me is it gave me freedom as a high school freshman. And I found my way to a party where I had my first drink, or I should say my first drunk, right? And that thing happened to me at that point in time. I was a kid that walked into the party with no alcohol in my system, a party I wasn't invited to, recognizing that this was hostile territory. I felt that everybody was looking at me like, what's he doing here? We didn't invite him, right? I was a kid who wanted to be loved, comforted, and understood as I walked into the party. And in the course of 2 beers, literally 2 beers, that's not all I had, but by the time I had 2 beers in my system, I went from being a guy that wanted to be loved, comforted, and understood to one who loved, comforted, and understood you. Everything shifted for me. I literally, all of a sudden, it was no longer hostile territory. It changed the world for me. But we know what happens, right? Booze takes control. I suffer from this disease of more. And if things could have just stayed at that 2 or 3 drink mark, right, and I'd been comfortable with that, then my life might have been significantly different. But this body allergy takes over, and I'm off to the races, and I drink more than I think I'm going to drink, and I burn my life to the ground. My life has been a series of experiences where I've sought inside validation through outside sources. I've sought inside comfort through external stimulus. I'll feel better when she does this, when I get that money, when I get that car, when this happens, when I get that praise or that applause. But the problem with me is that none is it's never enough, right? I mean, it's just like booze. That I've had lots of praise in my life. My problem is not that I suffer from a lack of praise. My problem is I suffer from a unnatural craving for praise, for affection, for understanding, for love, for respect, right? And it plagues me. And this experience of coming, listen, very few people I know walk into the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous because their life is going well, right? We don't shoot a 68 at Pebble Beach and win Powerball and marry the woman of our dreams or whatever, and say, man, I think I need God in my life and I think I need AA, right? I literally had burned my life to the ground. Every relationship in my life was in disaster mode, like disaster. My father had passed away, right? 5 years before I got sober. And that relationship for me was really a pivotal relationship. And it's for many, and I'm sure many of the men here will share, similarly. There's something about seeking the praise of a father for a son. For a guy like me, there was never enough. And when it came, I didn't recognize it. It was never good enough, and it wasn't in the right form. I was just these nerves walking around through the world looking to be, stimulated and told that it was going to be okay. I'm a guy that has lived my life by and large never really feeling that it's going to be okay. That's how my life was. I woke up every morning, and I kind of came to or woke up in a panic, like what shoe is going to drop, So walking into the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous and being directed to the steps and kind of surrendering my will and my life over the care of a God I didn't believe in. And I say this a lot. I mean, I would have told you I was an atheist, but being an atheist actually requires work, right? I was just a half-assed agnostic, right? I mean, I didn't believe in God, did not believe that there was the presence of any great being running the universe, and certainly did not feel that there was a being in the universe that had any interest in me whatsoever. But I knew that this being was going to fry me for the things I did wrong, right? So it was this weird dichotomy of like not believing in God, but knowing that I was doomed by this thing I didn't believe in. And so this really this emotional immaturity. Um, I heard a guy in Scott Redmond actually described like his higher power was, probably before he got sober in early sobriety as being like a cosmic game show host, like, behind curtain number one, like that's what we're going to look for. Like the God is the entity that's going to provide these things, whether it be feelings or material possessions or a relationship that works or whatever is going to make me feel okay, whatever's going to make me feel loved, comforted, and understood. Right. But there's never enough. I get filled up all the time, but I leak. I just, you know, it's, and, I actually never said this out loud before, but, there's this element of it where I would literally like go to the doctor's office. I would get a full physical. They'd check everything you can imagine checking. I'd get an absolute clean bill of health. And as I hit the side, I would feel elation and joy and peace and comfort for 20 seconds. And as I hit the sidewalk, I get this creeping dread, like maybe he missed this thing, or I didn't ask him about that. And it's just this way that I look at the world, the way I'm naturally, or I was naturally wired to look at the world, that this was a world of scarcity. It was a world where there wasn't enough to go around. There wasn't enough material possessions. There wasn't enough love. There wasn't enough care. There certainly wasn't enough understanding. I mean, the biggest kind of challenge, not challenge, but like the biggest like eye opener for me was after being sober for a while. I'd go somewhere and people would introduce me and not explain me, right? Before I need to be explained. This is Kevin, don't talk about this stuff, or he is a little sensitive. So I walked into this first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was this guy that, like most of us probably, didn't come in because things were great. In fact, 2 nights before, I was contemplating taking a ride. I was actually making plans, taking a ride to the Newport Bridge, which is not far from my home, a place where somewhere between, 8 and 10 people every year decide to end it. And that became a serious thought in my mind, that the world would be better without me. It's almost that thought that I had when my dad was leaving, right? It's just, I may be crap, but I'm really important, so that the world would be better without me here, because, that my negativity has such an enormous impact. Nonsense, right? And I sat in that meeting, and for the first time, people were, they weren't talking about my drinking. They weren't saying, Kevin, you've got to do something about your drinking. They weren't judging me. They weren't, I didn't feel like I was being exposed, right? There was this integrity in the way that they spoke. There was this humility, this vulnerability about, how they shared, not only their, like their drinking stuff. Yes, absolutely. I identified with the mental obsession and the body allergy and this, but more than that, I really resonated around the spiritual soul sickness that people talked about. I've heard it described as the spiritual tapeworm, right? Just literally like just wanting more and more and more. But what does a tapeworm do? It takes all of our nourishment. We don't get nourished by the things that we're actually receiving, because it's taking it. And that's how I felt. And I'd gotten to a place, I was 38 years old. It was almost 17 years ago, where I was not looking the world in the eye at all. I mean, I was so beaten down, and I felt like I was so just bankrupt that I was walking into meetings and I was like being greeted by guys who were in, homeless shelters, who were looking me in the eye, and I was incapable of looking them in the eye. And I that sounds judgmental, and I don't intend it to be, but where I was below what we might think of as a lower rung in society, right? How I felt about myself was so desperate and hopeless and useless. And I certainly was not in any position to give anything, or at least I didn't feel like it. Because if you're like me and you have the spiritual tapeworm that's getting all of your spiritual nourishment, what do you give with? You know, what's there? And I was pointed to this 12-step program. I've heard it say, like, Kevin, you're too sick to stay sober. On the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're going to need the program too. And the program are these 12 steps. And, one of the things I've learned in recovery is that what I think is good isn't necessarily good, and what I think is bad isn't necessarily bad. And the devastation that I had wrought in my life, and the literally being on the verge of suicide, of ending it all for me, was the springboard for this new life, this surrender at depth, right? And getting busy in the program, and working these steps, and trying to change my lens to, yeah, certainly some of the steps are introspective, right? We've got to drill before we fill, right? But once that work has been done, and the causes and conditions have been identified, turning the focus outward, right? Developing that relationship with the higher power, with whatever that higher power is. And thank God for Ebby Thatcher and what Ebby brought to Bill, choosing our own concept of God. Because, my immature understanding was not going to be the concept of the higher power that was going to, be a sustainable relationship that I could call upon. So, and then directing our attention to others. And, all my life I would have said, I have nothing to give. I have nothing. I'm literally emotionally bankrupt. How do I focus on others? And I so identify with Bill and his writing here. I mean, Bill, either certainly or likely suffered from clinical depression. Whether I forget what his official diagnosis was, or whether he actually received the diagnosis. But, I remember the story, I think it was 1940, when Bill was in one of his depressions, which I identify with, right? And, he was doing the work. He had co-founded AA. He had spearheaded the big book. He was carrying this message to others. People were getting sober for the first time. Lives were changing. Things were happening. Like, all of this good was starting to sprout up around him. But he didn't feel any of it. He never felt the consolation of this, right? And it was a rainy night, and there was a knock on the door, and it was Father Ed Dowling, this Jesuit priest from St. Louis, who had read the big book. And the Jesuits have this great affection for their patron, St. Ignatius, and Ignatian spirituality. And he came to talk to Bill about what he saw as this great similarity between the 12 steps and Ignatian spirituality. And he found Bill in this state, like this absolute desperate condition, right? no matter what good was happening around him, he had the inability to identify, he had the inability to feel it for any periods of time. And, the hopelessness of like the story is like, as Bill told his story to Father Dowling. And then I think Father Dowling quoted scripture back to him. He said, he was like, blessed are they who do hunger and thirst. Those are God's chosen people, he pointed out, because they're always distinguished by their yearnings, their restlessness, and their thirst. Not unlike what Carl Jung wrote about, right? But Bill wasn't satisfied with that answer, right? He said something to the effect of like, will there ever be any relief? Will I ever feel better? Was I ever going to have any satisfaction, any relief from this pain? And without like a moment of hesitation, Father Dowling said, no, never. Like, you're never going to feel relief. Like, sounds like tragedy, right? But Father Dowling went on to say, what you suffer from is what lots of great people who've made such remarkable differences in the world suffer from. It's divine dissatisfaction. This yearning, this feeling of hopelessness, this feeling of emptiness, until they are connected, at depth with their higher power, right? My heart, my soul is restless, Lord, until it rests in thee, right? And I think that gave Bill a little bit of relief. And I identify with that so profoundly. I'm at my best when I'm with you, right? I have, let me do my math quickly. There are 336 eyes looking back at me right now. Yeah, 118. Now there may be somebody with one eye. I'm assuming that all of you have two, but if I'm not, please, if I'm wrong, please forgive me. But there are 336 eyes looking back at me now. Under normal circumstances, that would terrorize me. Like 6 eyes looking back at me would terrorize me. My father's 2 eyes, my mother's 2 eyes looking at me, a teacher, a coach, absolute sheer panic and terror. But there's something about being with alcoholics. There's something about this common shared experience where we realize at our core, we're just the same. We are just the same. It's where I get energy. And as long as I continue to be connected with you and in this program, I stay filled up by and large. But it is so profound to me that the moment I kind of let things slip, whether it's my prayer life, my meditation life, my service, my meeting attendance, my service in AA, my reading, I'm that 14-year-old kid clinging to my father's ankles again. It's like a time machine. What I thought was good for me isn't necessarily good, and what I thought was bad for me is not necessarily bad. I thought that if I got the things I wanted out of life, I was going to be okay, that I was going to feel okay. I've received most of the things I've ever wanted, many of them without even like trying that hard. And honestly, if I gave you a list of things I wanted on January 22nd, 2004, probably within a month of sobriety, that list would have been, all those boxes would have been checked off. But it's not what gives me satisfaction. It's not what gives me that sense of peace and comfort, that emotional maturity, which is so, it's elusive. This deal for me is kind of like dialysis, right? I mean, if you have kidney failure, and I don't want to sound like I know what dialysis is. I've never had dialysis, but what I understand of dialysis, if you have kidney failure, you can go a few days maybe or a week without dialysis, but then the poison starts to build up. Your body's incapable of straining the bad stuff out, and you need help or you get sick. And that's how this combination of things that I said, the prayer, the meditation, the readings, the commitment to a home group and service, connecting with a sponsor, sponsoring men, but then also beyond that, taking some vision of this into the rest of the world. It's really kind of easy to be, spiritually impressive, let's say. Maybe that's the wrong word, but I'll use it. Between the Serenity Prayer and the Lord's Prayer. The challenge is doing that between the Lord's Prayer and the Serenity Prayer out there. I can have buttons that people can push that I don't even know I had the buttons, actually. I mean, I didn't even know I had the buttons, but they can be pushed. Until my father passed away, I'm not going to talk much about him except that, one of the great gifts of recovery that's actually helped me on this journey is making that amends to him long after he passed, but doing that work and starting to feel more like a grown-up. My mom is 88 years old, right? And boy, we alcoholics can hurt our mothers, she was a woman that suffered the brunt of my disease for the duration of it. Actually, before I picked up a drink, she was suffering the brunt of my disease, right? Because I was a little twerp. I was this kid that just needed everything, and I would have annoyed me, very quickly. And she was remarkably patient. But then once I was on the run, I was on my 24-year tear. What I stole from her materially, spiritually, intellectually, I mean, it's almost impossible to quantify what I took from that woman. But in fact, to the point where I was a year sober, and my family, my wife and children, 4 children, they threw this big 40th birthday party for me, and my life had turned around remarkably. And my mom didn't believe it. She couldn't trust this process because I was this immature, selfish, dishonest, dishonorable guy that caused her so much pain she couldn't afford to reinvest. So she didn't come to my party. She just said, "I just can't do that. Thank you for the invitation, but I'm not coming." So by sitting down with her and actually over time having a formal amends process, but then over time, doing my 9th step work with her, evolving into a relationship of maturity and love and mutual respect has been one of the greatest gifts of sobriety. And what I think is good is not necessarily good. And what I think is bad and it's not necessarily bad. A month ago, we got bad news. My mom was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer and given weeks to live. And the emotionally unstable and immature Kevin would have said that that's a Greek tragedy and that's horrible and lots of tears and what about me and the loneliness and the fear and whatever. And I can't say there hasn't been any of that. But because of this walk that I've been shown, I've actually been able to show up and be present, to be a loving observer of my life and of hers, rather than a psychotic participant in it. Because I was the guy that was bringing chaos and misery wherever I was. And I would have made my mother's terminal lung cancer about me. And because of this way that you've all shown me, I've been able to show up and be of real service, to be present, to honor her wishes. She decided the doctor said, listen, this is terminal. We can do some chemotherapy and, maybe we can extend your life a little bit, but she made her decision that she wasn't going to go through with that. And the old me and the me that's left to my own devices would have kind of fought her on that, saying, come on, mom, you've got to fight. You've got to. But I honored her by telling her whatever her decision was, that I am here right next to her, that I'm sitting beside her and I'm holding her hand, and that I am on the sidelines just cheering you on. As she turned 88, we had this, great, I was planning this great party and, crazy, like it's COVID, but we brought her 92-year-old buddy over, Shirley, and they're like Thelma and Louise. And we live on the East Coast, got lobsters, big lobsters. And they had these lobster hats. And so I was planning these festivities. And she said, oh, you don't have to do something so big for me. Words I would never actually think about myself, or certainly not say out loud. Don't go to trouble, thinking about me. But that's how she feels. And I said, come on, mom, you only live once. And she said, no, Kevin, you only die once. You get to live every day. That's when I asked her to be my sponsor. But anyway, no. I would have told you that the news that we received was the most devastating, even knowing that she's 88 and has lived a wonderful life, and it was devastating. It would have been about me. But because of this program, because of, I lost some, because these 230 eyeballs looking back at me, I've been shown another way. Spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. I'll close with this thing I just heard recently, which, I'm a perfectionist who doesn't usually work hard at, it's another irony, right? Like a kind of a lazy perfectionist, like kind of like a lazy atheist. But I'm a perfectionist when it comes to your stuff. But for mine, I cut myself slack. But spiritually, my idea was that it had to be perfect or it wasn't worth taking to God, right? Like if God's perfect, I can't present this unfinished package, this mess. So when I clean my act up, I'll take it to him. And I have the tendency to feel that way still, if left to my own devices. So I'll get into these crazy rituals and routines, right? I'm going to meditate this way, exactly this way for this length of time. I've got to drink this sort of tea. I've got to have the right sort of music. I've got to get the, okay, we're going to do yoga. I'm going to read this sort of thing. And it's got to be all right. I've got to get this kind of spiritual perfection, which we know doesn't really exist. And I heard a story like on a podcast recently. Somebody was saying, well, I've spent 30 years in the desert by myself in solitude. I've been contemplating the sacred readings. I've been communing with my higher power. I've been meditating for 15 hours a day. And I'm now able to walk across the water. To which Buddha replied, but the ferry's only a nickel. There's, I think, a beauty in that this thing is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be the ideal, the thing that we believe it has to be. We are human, and we have to be fully human and embrace that imperfection as long as we keep on the path, facing forward. I can hear myself starting to ramble, and some of you may say that started 40 minutes ago, but so I know that's a good time for me to cut it off and open up the meeting for sharing. So it's been great to be with all of you. Thanks for spending time with me tonight, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Kevin. Great share, man. It's beautiful. I'm so sorry to hear about your mom. I'm glad she's got a son like you. Hey, do we have anybody who wants to raise their hand and be called on? So if you want, you just go to the participants box and you can raise your hand. What about Don? Don L, you want to share for me?
I'll share for you. Can you hear me? Because I'm
in
the mountains of North Carolina and my internet's unstable. If I start, dragging, just do this.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was, I like when people tell their stories. It gives me it's like a, kind of like a rolling into reality. And it's very nice, easy entry. I was listening to that. One of the things you said that sparked something in me was spiritual nourishment, and that, I need that. And the dependencies cut me off from, that nourishment, because I don't know, kind of, eating potato chips and sugar instead of actually eating like spinach that I need. But I'm running around looking for, a donut shop, like trying to figure out how to make myself nourished. And I love that. I need to be nourished spiritually, because I am starving. I have like the starvation for me. So I'm an artist, and I have this thing, people always call you a starving artist. And one of the things that I always say about being a starving artist, it's not about not having anything to eat. It's about not having community and not having people who are like-minded around. So you get to be starving. And for me, as far as being in recovery, I will get starved for connection and not realize where I'm going to get it from, because when I'm in that place, I'm looking everywhere but what I'm supposed to be looking at. And I like the way you talked about how your spiritual practice becomes a thing where I'm looking for, potato chips and candy, and I'm not actually being nourished because I'm picking on the right kind of tea. For me, it's the perfect kind of sage. That'll do it. And so it's just an interesting thing. The other thing, and I like what you said, that restlessness creates a yearning in me. And as much as I think it's challenging, let's just say challenging, not necessarily difficult, but it is challenging being alcoholic, because there is an emptiness inside of me that doesn't seem to solve itself. And I don't grow up emotionally. I just grow sicker and sicker and sicker if I'm not treated. And so I like that yearning, and restlessness is part of that divine dissatisfaction. And for me, this week I had an experience. I was in Richmond, Virginia, and I was coming here where my husband and I have created a space in Western North Carolina, and my husband passed away, and I was reluctant to come here. I got fussing and fighting. I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. And my sponsor in infinite wisdom said, well, don't go. So it let me off the hook. I was like, all right, now I don't have to go. Nah, 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 nah. Like she was monitoring it somehow. And I settled into, my morning routine, and I journaled a little bit, and I realized I have to go. And that divine inspiration that is being kind of created, like if I have an inspiration that I know comes from a sincere place, I have to follow it. I can't say, oh, that won't be it, and move on to the next popcorn machine. You know what I'm saying? And as I've arrived here, I've spent 3 days in divine satisfaction. So when that intuitive thought or decision takes place and I actually do it, there is a comfort and a release and a purity that comes along with it. And I don't always feel totally connected. Sometimes I feel completely cut off from the sunlight of the spirit. But this morning I was sitting over here in a chair, and I was, just in the moment, and the sun shined through the window and hit my shoulder. And I knew that it wasn't just the sunshine, that I was actually connected. And we get that. If I stop chasing that elusive fantasy of what's going to make me feel better, it's amazing how it actually works to serve my soul. And my soul gets fed, my soul gets nourished. And then, and only then, am I capable of carrying any kind of message to anybody. Because when I am serving self, I am not someone, you do not want what I have. These are facts. And I'm kind of the girl that splatters against the windshield. It is not pretty on me. And so I keep coming to Thursday night. I keep telling Sam and Chris, keep saying, oh, thank God y'all did this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you for sharing, Kevin.
Thanks, John.
And now we have Shelly from California, or maybe Shelly's last name is California. I don't know, but Shelly, you're
No.
up.
The state of California, from the city of angels. My name is Shelly. I am an alcoholic. That was a fabulous pitch. When I got sober, I started work. Well, my husband and I, we were always interacted in businesses. So we always were given attention. We were always serving people. And came to LA. I became a street vendor in a particular place, and that was fun. Always interacting with people, praising the merchandise. And then, as a result of making amends, I got a job working for Bikram Yoga, and I would sign up students to become teachers, and that was very, very fulfilling. Fulfilling that you are helping somebody, and fulfilling that you got attention, because I was very, very good at it. So that couple were working with others, and if you need anything, go to Shelly. Shelly could do it for you. She'll have it done for you. And I got a lot of praise, but I never paid attention to it. So comes this virus, and we don't go anywhere. We don't go anywhere for 2 weeks. And then I go out in the street, and I feel like I'm a stranger in my own city. And then I started catching on that I'm not getting any attention. Like there's nobody to like chit chat with, and they'll say something to you and you say something to them in person. And I started catching on to something that I needed attention. So now when I go out I go to the markets, I always say hi to people, and I'm helpful, and I give a smile. And There was a lady that walked a little difficult today, and I was waiting for my ride, so I pulled out a shopping cart and I gave it to her, and she had the most beautiful smile on her face. And I felt something inside of me that I did something nice for somebody, and I was happy about that. Now I understand why my arguing with my husband, I was fighting for attention that I wasn't getting, and I didn't even know that. So it's interesting, 30 years sober, what I'm finding out about myself. At home, with family wasn't about giving attention and praising you or any of that stuff. So I'm very grateful that I could recognize it. Just last year, I identified what a self-seeking motive was, where I actually felt it. You know,
Shelley, you muted.
So I thank you so very, very much for your share. You really shared a lot about to be able to understand what this meeting is all about. Thank you. Hello, Joel.
We have Joel. Does Joel want to share?
My name is Joel. I'm a real alcoholic.
Joel.
This has been a wonderful meeting. I'm just in a lot of pain. I threw out my back and it's kind of preoccupying my thoughts, but thanks for calling on me. I'll pass.
Love you, buddy. We'll say one for you when you're feeling better, okay? Hey, Kevin, you know, one of the questions I had for you that I think would be good, that would be neat to hear you answer is, man, you have like a really accomplished life. I mean, as somebody from an outsider, you've got a really good highlight reel, man. I mean, you got a beautiful wife, beautiful kids, successful career. I mean, hang out with a lot of important, cool people, fly all over the world. What have been some of the bottoms in your sobriety? What have you had either just, you know, where you had real surrender again experience or new surrender experiences or stuff where you had to shuck a big nasty bunch of dependencies or any of that stuff?
Yeah, all of it. What's the low lights? Watch out when you get what you want, what you think you want. Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I'm very grateful for a lot of the things that have gone well in my life. I mean, I walked into the halls of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was $750,000 in debt, and I didn't own anything. I mean, I didn't own anything, like not a house, like not a car, like nothing. That was just spent on what I would say was the experience. And because of not focusing on that, like I'm going to pay my bills, or I'm going to make money, or fix my marriage, or fix my, career, or fix my health problem, not being singularly focused on those things, but focusing on this other thing, this solving the booze problem, but also, behind that, building this relationship with a higher power, and really trying to live a life of service, right? The good luck just started to flow in. But I'll tell you, sometimes I look back at, I hesitate to say this out loud because I'm somewhat like a, baseball player who gets up to bat and he has his little like routine because he's superstitious, and I don't want to necessarily jinx things, but, but I wonder, my first year of sobriety, when I had very little, there was a purity to that. There was a simplicity. If all you have, if you have one book and it's a good book, that's all you have, it's easy to be focused on that one thing. If you have a library, or you have like a lot of things, it's easy to be distracted. So that first year of sobriety, if I think back when I didn't have anything by like the standards of what success means. That may have been the most joyful I've been. But you know, don't cry for me. I'm like, life is remarkable as long as, you know, I continue to not focus on the attachment to those things, Sam. You know, um, money isn't the root of all evil; it's the love of money, right? Misquoted. That money, I mean, I have to remove the unnatural attachment, which is my problem. You know, it was the problem before I got sober as the 14-year-old, you know, up to my age of 14, where I was so unnaturally attached to these needs to be loved, comforted, and understood, and get my stuff. And, you know, I just realized I started to tell about like a scarcity mindset, but I never finished that when I was, you know, because of the program, you know, where my mindset now is one of abundance, that the world is actually a friendly place, and it's a friendly place for everyone, right? And that it's actually designed to provide the things that we need to help us grow and evolve. And if I lose track of that or lose sight of that, I'm doomed. I mean, I you know, the surrenders have to keep coming. It's like, it's, you know, like Charlie Parker says, you know, it's like the layers of an onion. And the only question at the end of the day is, how big is this onion? Because there's a lot of layers. So maybe you can make something out of that word salad, but that's what I've got for you right now, Sam.
Thanks, man. Aaron, what about you, Aaron Ham?
Yeah, hey, what's up, man? Aaron, alcoholic. Thanks for calling on me, Sam. Yeah, Kevin, man, what a wonderful, wonderful talk. You know, I always get so much out of these meetings, just a different, you know, you go to AA in the same town and you kind of know who the, I don't want to call them gurus, but you know what I'm saying? You kind of hear all the good stuff if you're in there for a year or two. And don't take that out of context. You know what I'm talking about, though. So, I mean, it's good to get the perspective from different people all over on here. But you said several things that just really hit. I love what you said early on about validation or approval. I think it was Sam that said to me one time, he goes, man, I've never sat around and felt adequately validated, like where I couldn't use anymore. You know, there's never a point where I say, you know, I've sufficiently been validated right now. And I feel that, you know, it's funny. When people compliment me, I still catch myself doing this. When someone pays me a compliment, I automatically act like either I can't comprehend what they said or I just didn't hear. I'm like, well, what do you mean by what? I just want them to elaborate a little bit on their praise towards me. And I don't know, man, it's funny. I have these things I look forward to. I don't know what an accomplishment coming up, whether I'm going to start something or, you know, maybe, I don't know, you get a house or whatever it is. And you think, and I don't know about you, but I'm like, man, I'm gonna put this on Facebook. It's gonna feel so cool. And it's just, you know, I don't think I've ever done anything, no matter how big it is, that I couldn't use. It's never lasted more than a week, and a week is a stretch. Usually by about 3 a.m. when the likes start dwindling, or you know, whatever it is. And it's not all about social media. I just mean in life, where it's like, damn, I've looked forward to this for about 4 months and it's gone in about 18 hours. And but I'll still chase the next thing. I don't know. And you said something, this isn't, it's just something about the health concerns. I don't know, man. This is just way off. I've been convinced I've had a tumor for about 4 years, you know, and I've had it checked out twice. And it's funny that lasts for about 2 weeks of some sort of, you said you walked out of the office. I get about 2 weeks out of it and I'm laying there and I feel this stress headache coming on. I'm like, man, it's just my
Will you
life.
sponsor me? 2 weeks is a long time.
Is that right? Yeah. That was the latest one. They did like some MRI. The first one was an X-ray. I'm like, that probably gave me some more damn cancer than checked for. And the point. But anyway, it's just a trip. But I love my favorite thing you said. And I'll start to kind of wrap this up. Is the good. Well, I wrote on a piece of paper, good equals bad, bad equals good, and that's not always the case. But it's funny. I had about a year and a half. Well, some of the things in my life I would have killed for. I mean, I would have done some very dirty deeds to acquire. I've gotten those things, and those turned out to be some of the worst things that ever happened to me. And vice versa, I think is more important. I had about a year and a half sober, and I relapsed, and there was a 7.5 month period. I was in the hospital 12 times in that 7 month. I mean, it was just a dirty, raunchy, horrible experience. And I was always praying for another shot at this. And I didn't really acknowledge this, but I wanted God to just kind of strike me sober. Like, give me all my friends back, put the chip back in my pocket, give me the job, you know. And I told him my car out. You know, it's a long story. My mom was in town. I just got out of the ICU. Long story. I totaled my car, get evicted from my apartment in jail, DUI number 5, car is gone, apartment's gone, blew through student loans, no job. And the people in AA had kind of distanced themselves from me too. If you drink like I drink for over 7 months, people just rightly so distance themselves. And it was a joke with Sam. People would call Sam, they'd be like, man, Aaron's struggling. He called me in a blackout. Sam would be like, don't you dare go over there, call mobile crisis. You know what I'm saying? Just that. And anyway, the point is I went to jail, and I would have told you that night was one of the worst nights of my entire life, but that night was the catalyst for what I have today. It was, I mean, my prayers were all those prayers I prayed and wanted to be sober again. That's what it took. You know, it wasn't a magic wand. It was a whole lot of crap, but the life I have today is better than anything I would have dreamed of. And it wouldn't have happened if that night did. And I mean, I have countless examples like that. But the very last thing I'll say, I love what you said. You said, watch out when you get what you want. And that's one of the truest statements I've ever heard. I don't know what it is about that. I mean, my kid is screaming in the background. It's actually got me a little nervous. His mother, my wife's down there. But anyway, Sam, thanks so much for calling on me, Kevin. I could talk on that, man. I really appreciate that. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. So that's it.
Thank you, Aaron. We have Norma Branch, right? Norma Branch?
Yes. Hi.
Hello. Hey.
All about alcoholic, and thank you, Kevin. 2 Kevin meetings in a row. That's
You couldn't get enough. What did you lose a bet?
Thank you, Tim. Tim turned me on to you, so I'm glad to be here. That was a great. I mean, I've heard you and I can't think of his name, Mr. White.
Ralph.
Ralph. God, that was too much surprise one day. I don't know if I can handle it, but I probably needed it. But I feel like, you know, like you did. Like I was always alcoholic. I just triggered it with 15 when I took my first drink, and then I was off and running. And but I didn't realize that when when you grabbed your father's legs, I mean, that just touched me. And then when you said I was being so selfish, and I was thinking, I never would have looked at it. I felt so sorry for you. And then because kids to me are so innocent, they don't know. But I guess me being an alcoholic, I do want it for myself. I want you to be the father I want you to be, and because I want to feel good. And I think that maybe me wanting you to be the father that I want you to be is because I know better than you. And I don't want mom to be hurt. And I don't want, and I never put that together as selfishness, but it is. And today I was at work, and it's been real slow, and so I was cleaning out some stuff that needed to be cleaned out because it's been there for like 10 years. I just didn't have anything else to do. So my back started bothering me, and I said, "Let's go home now." And I was getting ready to go home, and my manager, who I've had on 3-4 steps, but we've been getting along great the last maybe 6 or 7 years. We've been getting along great. But he asked me to help him do something. He's the same age as me. And I was thinking, damn, I was just getting ready to go home and my back is killing me. So I told him, my back is really hurting. He said, well, that's okay. I'll get it taken care of. I'll get someone to help me with it tomorrow. And I said, yeah, I was getting ready to go home and my back's hurting. And so I went home, And then I thought about it when you were talking, and I was thinking, my back's hurting because I don't want to listen to the doctor and do walk every day. And I don't want to drink a gallon of water every day. I'll drink 3 or 4 glasses, but I'm not, I play doctor, and I know why I'm hurting is because I'm lazy and I don't want to do what the doctor asked me to do. Because when I do what the doctor asked me to do, I feel great. I feel like Superwoman. Yeah, I'll help you. What else you need to do? And I'm thinking, when he asked me that, I'm thinking, he always wants to talk or do something when he sees I'm getting ready to leave work. But I I'm still looking at other people, and I'm still being selfish and not my problems of my own making. I get the ball rolling. I push the first domino. I got the back hurting because I'm lazy. I'm older. I resent being older. I resent that I can't do what I used to do. I resent that I'm not Superwoman anymore. And when I do feel like Superwoman, you have to you have to catch me when I feel like I want to help you, not when you need my help. And I can be so selfish sometimes. And I know I love these Zoom meetings, and I have one sponsee who I talk to every week, and we read the book. But I needed, I needed more. And every time I ask God for another sponsee, I don't ask him for a sponsee. I ask him for someone that can help me stay sober, and I can help them stay sober. That's all that's it. And he always sends me somebody like that. So I got another sponsee, and I'm seeing myself again more and more. And it's like another layer of the onion is showing up, and it's beautiful how it works. And I won't say the St. Francis prayer every day. I say it, I relapse with the prayer. I do it for 6 months, and then it gets too heavy for me because I take it personally and I stop saying it. This is what an order. I can't go through with it. Like I don't have to be perfect. I just got to say it. I got to try to mean it. My sponsor used to say, Norm, I want you to say your prayers every day and say them until you mean them. So sometimes I have to say them over and over and over again, because I can say my prayers and be thinking about what I'm going to have for breakfast. I can actually do that. And so I have to mean it. And thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So good to see you, Norma. I didn't know it was you, Norma. I didn't know that was you, Norma from Nashville. What's up? So glad you joined us.
Hi.
Hey, what about Tim F?
Yeah.
Tim
Yeah.
F here, Tim Fitzpatrick, alcoholic.
Tim.
Thanks, Sam. I love this meeting. And, I've known Kevin probably 9 or 10 years, and I've never heard him tell his story. And I've been talking to him, trying to get him to share on his own meeting, but he refuses to do it. Kind of like, all the guys that have their own meetings will never share. I think that's kind of why they do it. That's their service. You were talking about Father Ed Dowling. He's one of the relationship with Bill Wilson and Father Ed is one of my favorite stories. There's a book called The Soul of Sponsorship. And I read that same story, and it really kind of helped me out. I'm sure there's a lot of people come in here that are spiritually dissatisfied. And I know I was. And I had a lot of spiritual prejudice when I came in, and I went for 6 or 8 months without saying the word God, because I didn't want you thinking that I thought what you thought when you said God, when I said God. And so I would just say higher power. And it just became more economical to just say God after a while. Because after 6 or 7 months, I figured out you didn't give a shit what I cared about when I said God, just as long as it wasn't me. And so that story about Bill and Father Ed is really revealing, because that was the first, I think as part of that book, it says is the first night that Bill Wilson slept the whole night through after his discussion with Father Ed Dowling, and Ed Dowling saying, no, you're never going to be satisfied. And what a relief, because I thought, I'll never be satisfied. And I really was suspect of somebody that said they knew what what their spiritual life was about, and they could, point out this, and this, and this is my spiritual belief. And I'm going, you're full of shit. You can't possibly have that structure. And then I read Lao Tzu says, he who knows cannot say, and he who says does not know. And I thought, well, there's some relief for me too. So at this point, I have no clue what my spirituality is. I know it when I hear it. It's kind of like art. When you speak and I hear it, I know it's God speaking. And my spirituality has grown because of people in here. Like John Edmund says, it's a 90-degree thing, comes down and out. And the spiritual message, and that's where I get it. So Kevin, I appreciate you, and I love this meeting, Sam, and I finally got to hear you speak. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Now you can sleep well tonight.
Oh, thanks, Tim. It's funny how much emphasis that I've put on, and I've heard over the years, and I've kind of learned this lesson. And people always say, wherever I go, there I am. That no matter where I move, I'm the first person I see there, right? And it's kind of that same thing with money. Like a lot of times when you're younger in sobriety and don't have a lot of, some people have a lot of money, but I had all kind of financial messes and disasters and all this kind of stuff. And then as it gradually gets better and things change, one day you realize that it wasn't that money wasn't important, and I don't want to jinx it either, because I sure do. I like making a lot of money, but the funny thing about it is that it doesn't do for me what I thought it was going to do. It doesn't change me. It's all relative. The amount of impact it has after a certain point is just like, I don't feel any different with this than I did a couple of years ago. I don't feel any different with that than I did a couple of years before that. And the big delusion was early on in life was a way that I could show my accomplishment, show that I was worth something. If I made a lot of money, that was something that I did in a lot of ways to get approval, or to, that I put a lot of emotional security on. And it's funny, the less important it became to me, the more money I ended up getting. You know what I'm saying? How that works. Yeah. Let's see here. What about Chris Street? Chris, you want to share? Man, I haven't heard from you in a while.
Oh man, I kind of felt like that was coming. Kevin, thank you so much for what you shared. I just identify with pretty much all of it. I think that it's really helpful for me to hear, like was said earlier, just when someone really goes through and spends a little time on some of that childhood stuff, and not even necessarily, that there was anything. So I don't know, just that it allows me to sort of draw connections that I haven't, maybe, just stuff that I had sort of gone back through and talked through with the sponsor, but still hadn't really looked at it in that way. And I think that need for approval is just something that it's sort of these, just as I'm sitting here, I'm sort of running through and I'm trying to pay attention to what everyone else is saying, but then I'm also sitting here thinking, reflecting on what you were saying, and then running these, drawing these threads through. And it's just, that need for just, that desire to just do sort of what's expected, or what I think is going to get me a certain type of, recognition, has just led me down so many paths that this just turned out to not actually be necessarily where I wanted to go. And it's, I think one of the things that for me has been just, I'm coming up on 3 years sober, so I'm still very new at all this, but it's just sort of starting to untangle some of those threads of how those decisions that are made based out of, fear and selfishness and desire for approval, then, kind of set the course for the next, however many years of whatever kind of career path you go down. So I'm sort of seeing how, this is just, I don't know, I'm not really sure where this is coming from, but I just see, how that even just things like big decisions that I would make, okay, well, I got to go to law school now. That's what I'm going to do, and it's just, And then looking at it years later and be like, what, like, where did that decision come from? And it's like, oh, well, that was something that was, that's a very respectable thing to be doing. Yeah, of course you did well on a standardized test. And so you should try to go to this. And then, this many years later, I'm sitting around, I don't know. It's just, I guess also COVID has given me maybe a little too much time to sit around and just ponder some of these things. And I suppose, that's where maybe the stuff you was talking about get into service, it just snap me out a little bit. But I think that, yeah, Sam's right. He hasn't heard from me in a while. So that's probably the other reason he called on me. But anyway, I appreciate this meeting a lot, and I appreciate what you had to share. And I don't think any of that made any sense, but thank you for calling on me, Sam.
All right, Kevin, do you have anything that maybe you feel like you thought about that you hadn't shared yet? Because we got a few more minutes. Anything that perhaps you might be inspired to speak to before we close it up?
Well, like a good AA, you can always there's always something left in the hat. No, I just that theme of what I think is good for me isn't necessarily good, and what I think is bad for me is not necessarily bad. Because of this program, what I've learned, instead of if something happens that I perceive as bad, whether it's uncomfortable or it's embarrassing or scary or whatever it is, instead of being kind of paralyzed by that or go into some emotional tailspin as a result of it, what I've learned is, and being a practitioner of this, and not a perfect practitioner, but someone who's practicing it, is that those are kind of postcards from God, right? Like, Kevin, I love you. Pay attention to this thing, right? I was, I don't know, it was probably 12, 13 years ago. I was in Nashville at the Usual Suspects men's retreat out in actually Dixon, right? Camp Garner Creek. And Sandy Beach was one of the moderators. Sandy and Jerry Jones, both wonderful AAs who've passed. And Sandy is just an extraordinary, he was a mystic, and I developed this wonderful relationship with actually both of them. But I remember asking Sandy a question. I was probably 4 years sober at the time. So it was probably 2008. And, I'm a guy whose life is starting to take off, right? At that point, right? 4 years sober, lots of good stuff's happening. These little kids, these little rats that I had when I got sober, they're growing up and they're like little, like mini versions of me, right? And they're wonderful, but they're like O'Neills, right? And one of my real kind of profound or acute character defects is impatience, and it's so connected to this emotional immaturity, like, because what impatience is for me is pushing away the pain. It's getting uncomfortable with the pain, whether it's boredom or whether it's something that makes me like just squirm, like that. I'll finish people's sentences for them, right? Don't try this at home. But I said, years ago to my wife when she was telling a story. My wife does not tell short stories, right? She likes long ones. And I'm sitting there and I'm probably tapping my foot. I am tapping my foot. And I'm doing this thing. I'm leading in. It's like that pulling, let's pull the punchline out. I just know I can feel it. I feel it inside myself. It's just, it's a sickness. And she stops and she looks at me and she says, "What?" And I said, "Oh, it's nothing. I just listen faster than you speak. Don't try that at home. It doesn't work," right? But my impatience is my what it reflects is my inability to feel discomfort normally. And if there's anything I've learned as an alcoholic, is that we alcoholics do not manage discomfort well. In fact, that's the reason why many of us drank, right? Because we're going to be uncomfortable, and we're going to solve that, right? So I'm with Sandy Beach. Yeah, I'm going to come back to Sandy. So I got a chance to add, there's this Q&A kind of, it wasn't even an ask it basket. It was, stand up and here's the microphone and ask your question in front of 140 of your newest friends and, and Sandy Beach and Jerry Jones. And I said, Sandy, I'm dealing with problems of being impatient. I've tried all of these tricks. Like, I'm in the office, I drive home, and I was told, okay, before you walk into the house, turn your cell phone off, turn your car off, sit in your car, your quiet car, and let silence envelop you. Maybe say a prayer or meditate for a minute. And when you feel your pulse rate come back to, normal, whatever that is, like 200, you then can walk into the house. And I try all these things. I walk in the house, and I walk in. I don't even think my shoes touch the ground as I walk in there. I'm floating because I'm so spiritually advanced at this point after meditating in my car for 43 seconds. And I walk into the house, and it's madness. Like, it's like the kid is one kid's shaving the cat. It's like that sort of madness. We don't have a cat, but anyway, if we had a cat, one of the kids would have been shaving it. And I walk in, and it's just cacophony. It's noise. And that's how it manifests inside my alcoholic brain. It's like multiple radio stations playing at the same time. So I said, Sandy, what do I do? Like, how do I get rid of this impatience? And like, I have these kids and whatever. And, I pray for patience. And his response was brilliant. He said, without the kids, the whole theory of patience, the whole thing about patience is just a theory. That, what do you think they're there for? Like, all these things are vehicles to get you to the next place, right? And it reminded me, like, life's distraction. What are these bad things that are going to come into my life that are actually going to be profound teachers for me? My daughter went to this thing called goat yoga. I've never been to goat yoga. It sounds pretty cool for her. Anyway, I'm like, what the hell is goat yoga? It sounds stupid and gimmicky, and it's just, it's a way to like pay for somebody's goats, right? It's just some scam. And my daughter, who was maybe 15 years old at the time, she said, no, Dad. She said, yoga is a spiritual practice. It's also an exercise, but it's a spiritual practice. And the goat reflects life. And it's life's distractions. And it's the problems that we experience in our life as we're on our spiritual journey. So when the goat comes and crawls on you or nibbles at your ear, you're supposed to just lovingly acknowledge it and release it, because recognize that that's just the way life is. So I asked her to be my sponsor too. But so with all these things that we think are just bad, I don't know. I have a mom that's like, she's hoping to make it to Christmas. That's what she's saying. I hope I make it to Christmas. If she were 20 years old, it would be tragic, right? But she's not. She's 88. But 88, it's still your mother, right? And it's sad. And I'll finish with this one story, and then I'm really done, Sam. But you asked. So my mother, I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had been baptized as an infant I don't remember it. I was probably like a month old. And my dad was Catholic. My mother was always, she described herself as an unbaptized Protestant because she was a member of the Congregational Church up here in New England. And I guess they baptize when you're like 15 or something. And I think she just went when she was younger, and then the family stopped going. So she's the unbaptized Protestant. And I never went to church as a kid, never. Like weddings, like twice. But I always felt that yearning for something, but it wasn't necessarily that. But anyway, fast forward, 2004 rolls around. I burn my life to the ground. Spiritual awakening. Ooh, there is a God. Okay, let me find him somewhere. And I follow this kind of path, and I find myself in the church, right? So I go through a process, RCIA, and we become, Catholic, right? I become confirmed. And my mom's still the unbaptized Protestant, and that's cool. Because the old me would have said, "Hey, you got to do something," and I'm worried for your soul. And now it's about surrender and let her kind of live her life. And this whole cancer thing came up about a month ago, and she said to me, "Where do you think I'm going to go when I die?" And I said, "Well, Forbes Funeral Home, and then Swan Point Cemetery." And we both laughed. But she said, "No, I mean, where do you think? Do you think I'm going to go anywhere?" And I said, "Mom, you're the most amazing human being I've ever known. You have my mother, my unbaptized Protestant mother prayed me into Alcoholics Anonymous. That mother that I abused, like, the lie that we tell ourselves, I'm only hurting myself. This woman would not let me into her life because she couldn't afford the pain. But what she did was she prayed for me. And I truly believe that she prayed me into the halls of AA. So she said, I think I want to be baptized. And I said, "Listen, I think that's wonderful, but I don't know anything about the Congregational Church. I can call someone." She said, "No, I want to be like my kids." And I said, "Okay." So I have a friend who's a priest. I said, "Why don't you just sit down and talk to him? And, whatever you want to do, Mom." And she sits down and talks to him. And I get this phone call. So actually, I back up a second. So for those of you who understand, are Catholic or understand either Catholic or have some understanding of it, when you're confirmed, you select a patron saint. And my patron saint is St. Augustine, because I got confirmed at the age of 38 years old as a 6-month sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And St. Augustine, if you've read his Confessions, it's like the first big book. He was a guy who ran wild, just horrible, like kind of early life. And his mother, St. Monica, prayed for him, and his conversion happened. Now they're both saints, right? So anyway, my mother, I get this call. It's a Saturday about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And she said, "I'm going to be baptized and confirmed and have my first communion tomorrow. And my patron saint is St. Monica, and I want you to be my godfather." So I'm my mother's godfather. And I didn't like force this, right? It's like the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard, right? And to live through that and to be there with her and see the peace that she received in that moment, and to be a loving observer of it and not a psychotic participant in it. I could have missed it, Okay, I'm really done now, Sam.
That was beautiful, man. So what we do is we just mute ourselves and inwardly say the Lord's Prayer to ourselves, because it sounds crazy over Zoom. So just like, a lot more peaceful, and it's inward. Amen. Hey, Kevin, thank you for a wonderful night and for giving your time to us this evening. That was beautiful.
It's great to be with all of you.
Very much, Kevin.